Hello, and welcome to Archives and Records Simplified. These videos are aimed at people looking for basic knowledge about archives and records management, although at times I will also touch slightly on information and library science. These videos are designed to provide bite-sized chunks, which means that almost every video will be less than 15 minutes. These videos are honestly for everyone, and comments and suggestions are always more than welcome. About me, Sean McMillan, I'm an archivist based in London, and you can learn more about me via my LinkedIn profile, to which there is a link posted below. And I'll also post a transcript and notes also if you struggle at any point to understand my accent. And lastly, if you enjoy these videos, I would be extremely grateful if you could kindly like, subscribe and share. Thanks again. Okay, so this video is about cataloging with Microsoft Excel. So in an ideal scenario, you would often want to catalog a collection using what is known as a content management system. And this is a system that would allow you to create descriptions about archival collections and what they contain. Examples of these are Archivist Toolkit, ArchiveSpace, AdLib and Calm Axial. And the advantages of a content management system is that it often allows you to create hierarchical descriptions, and often there'll be sort of linked data, so you can link indexes and authority records to archival collections and descriptions. One of the best features of these is that they often incorporate standards such as ISAD-G, so they include fields that correlate to ISAD-G, and they make it much easier to remember to fill out certain fields and to do it to a certain standard. However, this isn't always possible, and if you're a smaller institution or you're quite new to archives, on some occasions Microsoft Excel may be the only suitable option you're looking at. There's a number of ways I think you could catalog using Microsoft Excel. I'm going to suggest a specific way here, but what I would say is I do think this is, a few of the structures and the specifics I recommend here are very much arbitrary, and I'll note them as I go. But to be honest with you, you could do this in more than one way. And also, I think this would be a fantastic opportunity to explain a little bit more about ISAG and catalog structures just generally a bit more. Okay, so let's take a look at a catalog in Microsoft Excel. Now, so the first thing I'll note is that I've noticed over the years that there seems to be a sort of crossover between archivists and librarians and fans of Harry Potter. So to make this slightly more engaging, I've created a fictional catalogue for a fictional collection called The Archives of Albus Dumbledore. So as I say, I hope this makes it slightly more interesting. And the first thing I'll note is that you should note that this Excel sheet has 3 sheets. So there's a sheet here for the collection level description, there's a sheet for the first series, and there's a sheet for the second series. Now, this is what I mean when I say that there's different ways of doing this. This structure is completely arbitrary. Some people might prefer to try put the whole catalogue on one sheet. They may decide to put all their series on one sheet, so they have one sheet for the collection level description and then one sheet for everything else. Or they may decide to have all the different series on one sheet with the sub-series in another and with the files in another. It really depends what works for you. I don't think there's any right or wrong way of doing it. I just happen to have chosen this structure for this one here. Okay, so starting with the collection level description, so you should know, or you should remember from previous videos, that the collection level description describes the entire collection, and there are 3 columns here. So in the first field, in the first column, column A, I've included the ISAG fields. So as mentioned again in previous videos, ISAG is a standard which includes 26 fields which you can use to record information about archival collections. And these fields are organised into what's known as different areas. So for example, there's an identity statement area, there's a context area, and a sort of content and structure area, and I've maintained this prefix ahead of each title heading. And you'll also note that beside some of these fields, I've included either the letters M or HR. If it has the letter M, it means it's mandatory, in which that would mean that this field is mandatory for international exchange as recommended by ISAG. However, there's a number of other fields which I would say are highly recommended. So for example, it's often highly recommended that you add a scope and content. There's some fields that I haven't noted as highly recommended, but to be honest, it honestly varies by collection. The other thing you might note is that I've not filled out every single field. Rarely you would in an archival collection. As I say, personally, I would recommend that you try to keep it as simple as possible. I certainly think things like conditions and access, or a language note, or maybe something about the physical characteristics, is certainly that can be really useful. You can also use the archivist note to indicate who actually catalogued the collection, but generally I don't often think you need to include every single field. In fact, I would often use the fields as you need them. In column C, I've included the note in the ISAG standard about the purpose of each field. I wouldn't recommend that you keep this in an ISAG catalogue. You could if you want. Please think of this as being a bit like the stabilisers on a bike. I've included it here because I'm anticipating that many people who watch this video will be unfamiliar with ISAG, and I've attached it here just to give you some sort of context of what each field is. So for example, the purpose of the name of creator field is to identify the creator or creators of the unit of description. So as you can see, I've added some information about the collection at what's known as collection level description. So the collection is described as the fictional archives of Albus Dumbledore. It includes materials that date from 1950 to 2018. I've completely made that up. It includes about 18 boxes. It was acquired from Minerva McGonagall in November 2019, etc, etc, etc. Okay, and what I'll do is I'll scroll down this slowly just to give you an overview of each field and the fields I've added. And then, and of course feel free to pause the video at any moment if you want to take a look at anything in more depth. I've added some access points at the end. So access points are just a way to tag the collection and sort of add important information that you think might sort of signpost it for people that are interested. Okay, so let's take a look at series 1. So the first thing I think I'll note here is that each column corresponds to an ISAG field. Now you'll probably notice that I've only included a handful of the 26 ISAG fields. Now in theory you could add a lot more if you wanted to, and in fact you could also add a lot less. For example, there are certain fields you could cut here, but what I would generally indicate that as catalogues become more detailed, as you move further and further down the levels, as you begin to describe more parts of it, it becomes harder to add the same quantity of information. For example, it's very easy to create a detailed collection level description, but to replicate that kind of detail for say 600 or 700 file levels or even item level descriptions is very difficult. That said, I have noticed a couple as being pretty much mandatory, and that includes the reference and the title. If you're cataloguing using Excel, I would probably say that the level of description is quite important. There's a rule in ISAG that the relationship between constituent parts should be clear. So for example, you should be able to observe that this sub-series is a part of this series and that file is a part of this sub-series. Now this is partly indicated through the reference code. You should be able to figure it out for that, but that can get a bit confusing and the numbers can get a bit complex. So I think having a level of description note really helps. Extent is another really useful one. And it's also really good for the purposes of this video because it allows me to sort of demonstrate how each part of the collection incorporates its component parts. So for example, this series is 11 boxes and that includes 2 sub-series. The second sub-series includes 9 boxes, the first sub-series 2 boxes. The second sub-series I've subdivided further into sub-sub-series, one of which includes 3, one of which includes 6. So you'll notice 6 here because there are 6 boxes here, 9 here because 6 plus 3 is 9, okay? Or here, for example, you'll notice that there's 2 boxes, that creates 2, and of course if you add the 2 sub-series, it gives you 11 in the series, okay? So feel free to pause and rewind that and look at that a couple of times, but honestly it makes much more sense when you've got a bit more experience. And it's the same for the dates. The dates tend to be inclusive of all that lies beneath it. So, for example, say this file level here, you'll notice that there's a file, the date of it is 1950 to 1970, and the other one is 1971 to 1980, and thus the dates for this entire subseries is 1950 to 1980. If one of those files, if say I recatalogued the second one to say 1971 to 1995, I would have to update the subseries as well. If I updated it even more so, say to 2025, not only would I need to update the subseries, I would also need to update the actual series. I think conditions governing access is quite important too. There's a general rule in ISADG which recommends that you try avoid repeating information. Now, sometimes I would say it is necessary to repeat information, especially if you're ironically using some content management systems where people are going to sort of pull individual records. So in some systems, someone might pull a file description alone without any context, in which case it can be useful to repeat if, for example, the item is open or closed. But generally speaking, I think if you can avoid it, you should try avoid repeating information multiple times. So, for example, because this entire subseries is open, I've not included a conditions governing access note in the descriptions below. But because some materials are closed here, I have in this occasion because it's pretty much unavoidable. Same for the language note. English covers the entire series, therefore it didn't really feel like it was valid to repeat it at the lower levels. And lastly, I think scope and content, that's one that I think tends to be quite important, and you'll tend to see it at series or subseries level. What I would say is if you're ever unable to catalogue a collection beyond a certain point, sometimes a more detailed scope and content can be a decent trade-off. Now, the very last thing I'm going to do is, last thing I'm going to indicate is that for an 11 box collection, I would really probably never catalogue it to sub-series and certainly not sub-sub-series level. I've done it in this case just purely to give you an example of how a complex catalogue might be structured and the relationship between the reference codes and parts. But to be honest with you, if I was cataloguing a series that was less than 20 boxes, I would probably go straight to file. I would probably just describe these 11 boxes in a flat structure. But simply speaking, just because I'm assuming that most of the people who are looking at these videos are new to archival standards or are maybe unfamiliar with this, I thought it might make it just a little bit clearer. Okay, and we finish with series 2. And again, this is what I mean by a flat structure. You'll see that there's no sub-series or even sub-sub-series. It largely goes from series to file level. On one occasion, I've catalogued one box. Well, I've hypothetically catalogued it because this is an imaginary collection to item level. So you'll notice again, this is how it would look if I were to further catalogue the contents of one box. And just think about this as well, if I was to do this for the contents of every box, then you can imagine how the collection would grow exponentially. So as I say, I hope this has been clear. Feel more than free to take screenshots of this or to study this in a bit more depth. It's honestly something that becomes a lot more clearer as you get more experience and practice with it. Okay. Okay, and lastly, I thought I would finish with a small test. Again, don't worry, you don't need to submit any answers in the comments below or email me. This is purely for you. The answers will come about 2 or 3 seconds after this slide. So feel free to pause the video now, read over quickly and see how many you can get right. Okay? And here are the answers. So sub-series is a level of description. The order would go from fonts, series, sub-series, sub-sub-series, file, and item. You might go from item to piece, and you might even add an additional sub-sub-sub-series, but generally that's not recommended unless it's absolutely unavoidable. A note indicating that a catalogue has been closed for 20 years would go in the restriction on access note. You would need the name of creator for international exchange. That's one of ISADG's 6 highly recommended fields. Number 5 was true and number 6 was false. Okay, and that takes us to the end of the video. So again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel more than free to post them below. Thanks again.
And if you enjoy these videos, I would be extremely grateful if you could like, subscribe and share. And also just to remind you that I would be absolutely delighted to take any requests for future videos also.